Welcome, one and all, to the Storytellers podcast. I'm your host, Peter Lewis. I love that intro song. It's called Your Whimsical Co-Host, and I don't have a co-host, unfortunately. Taking applications. Anyway, welcome back to the Storytellers podcast. If you've been joining us so far, you know we have been working on this character workshop where we're talking about the beginning stages of designing characters for stories and even just getting stories up and running. You know, sometimes a story is only as good as its characters. But today we're going to kind of round this workshop off and bring it to a close. So in part one, we had talked about, building these powerful characters and how to give them these moments of impact, just a really basic sequence of how to do that. Part two, we had talked about powerful settings and how to insert your people into places and kind of take that surrounding area and give them really an avenue to take action in, or to exist in, or to do something in. And now we're here at this third and final part. And today it's going to be all about story plot and conflict, which is one of my favorite things. When it comes to plot writing and for conflict that's happening, it really does have to be a marriage between your characters and the conflict they're facing. You could have a really good plot and some really poorly written characters to go into there, or vice versa. You might have these incredible characters, but they don't have a way to express themselves because there's nothing that they're doing. When it comes to plot writing, there are so many different ways you can go with it. But man, if you get a good plot and some good characters, it'll just draw people in. Fun story, my wife and we actually just spent some time binge watching the entire Maze Runner series. And if you have not seen those movies, you need to go see them because they are incredible. One of my favorite dynamics of storytelling is watching people who start off completely unqualified and clueless. Honestly, people who really can't do much become these heroes who can just do everything. Or even if they're not confident in it, they're just like, I'm going to build up the courage and I'm just going to go. I have zero idea what's going to happen. But man, like those movies, every single time I watch them, I'm just like, yes, like it's so flipping good. On that note as well, fun fact about me, there are 4 movies that can make me cry on cue every single time I watch them. The first one is The Chronicles of Narnia, Voyage of the Dawn Treader. There's a scene at the end. Every time I see it, I weep like a child. The second one is It's a Wonderful Life, because I honestly think that is one of the greatest movies ever made in the history of time. Fun fact, another one is Tangled. I'm not going to talk about which part of Tangled, but I cry every single time it happens. And then, of course, The Maze Runner, the third movie, The Death Cure. Man, there are some heavy hitting scenes in that movie. And I have still, probably 5 out of 5 times I've seen them, I've cried every single time. But man, that's what a good plot can do, is it leaves you these just big, memorable moments where you see these characters and you're kind of drawn to these characters and you're almost kind of there with them. And you can feel the pain that they feel because of just how well written these stories are. So all that being said, let's dive into our workshop today. So part one, we had talked about building powerful characters who may start in one place and go to another, really how to structure them, how to give them a little bit of life. Part two, which just came out a couple weeks ago, we had also looked at powerful settings and how to take these characters and insert them into situations that can help them express who they are, but at the same time, uncover more about the plot and where these things are going to be taking place. And so that brings us to this episode where I want to talk about plot and conflict. So if you have been following, I love referencing movies and all kinds of media. And so I took a poll on Instagram, if you're following me. And the first episode, we had referenced a book passage. And the second one, we had referenced a movie clip. And so I thought, for this one, why not do a video game? I think it would be kind of fun. So I took a poll and I now have a winner to announce. So the winner of the video game reference of the day for this episode goes to, drumroll please, Red Dead Redemption 2. Shout out to my friend Ryan for putting in such a great nomination for a reference today. So I'm not going to go into an entire long spiel about what Red Dead Redemption 2 is about, But the story is set in the western part of the United States. So think of like old western movies. The year is 1899, and there is this man named Arthur Morgan who's part of this gang. So the time that Arthur's with this gang is really during a transition period in history. So these gangs and these, groups of people who would travel around the West, who would, rob trains and all that, that time is very much coming to an end because there's a lot more interference with the law that's taking place. And so what happens in this game is as Arthur is kind of following this transition period of his gang, he's getting more involved with the law. You're seeing kind of the turmoil that's happening in the group. And really, what they're trying to do is their end goal is we just need to change. We need to get out of here. We need to retire from this kind of weary lifestyle and get into something a little more solid. And so there's a lot of tension between Arthur and his gang leader. And so in the midst of this, you can see that there's some turmoil with their relationship. You don't know if they're going to stay as friends or if there's going to be change in it. But man, it is just one of those incredible stories that just brings people in. It's also cool to see because Arthur goes through a complex change where he's kind of this rough around the edges guy. And then, honestly, for the player, you can choose which way you go. You can begin to start making amends for the things you've done in the past, or you can really enforce that kind of rough and tough Western lifestyle and keep going down the path that you're currently going. So we're probably going to jump back and forth a little bit, probably with some Red Dead Redemption 2 references, and I might even throw some Maze Runner references in there as well, since it's pretty fresh in my mind. But what I did is I took some time and between some of my favorite books and movies and, games like Red Dead Redemption 2, I sat down and I was like, all right, there has to be an easy way to build a plot. Plots can be, again, there are endless ways you can take it. And what I really wanted to do was put it in a place where it's a little more digestible and bite sized to get it started, but then it does open up the ability to take it a little further. So I broke it down into about three different steps. And the first one I want to talk about is direct versus indirect. When we talk about characters, the characters that we create, they're really special and they're precious to us, and we want to take care of them. And sometimes that means we put them in hard situations, and then we want to see those characters thrive and do well. And so one way you can really impact your characters with your plot is this plot going to affect them directly or indirectly? In the sense of storytelling, maybe in our story, we have a character who hears about a problem and they're the type of person who says, well, I want to go solve that because I like solving problems. And maybe later, once they get involved into this indirect thing, maybe there's like a war going on in the area, they start to realize like, oh, this is hitting me at home. This has just became a direct impact towards me. At the same time, you can also have it the other way, where maybe this character is going about their living, they're doing their own thing, and something happens to them. And all of a sudden, they have this conflict in front of them that directly impacts them in a really personal way. And so now they have this whole different scenario. It's not as much going and saying, like, I'm going to help. It's, oh, I'm in trouble. I need to do something about what's happening to me. So, keeping that in mind, the second part I like to break it down into is forced versus not forced. And so, what that means is this character, now that they have this conflict, are they being forced into it? Maybe they're a military person and they were drafted, so they had no choice. Or are they not being forced? Is this more voluntary? Is this something where, they decide there's not really anything pushing them into it, but they have to make a decision. Am I going to go be involved in it? And so there's where you can start having combinations. So maybe it's an indirect threat that they're forced into, or maybe it's a direct personal thing that they have a choice if they want to actually go after the resolve in it. And then lastly, get other characters involved. So a lot of times you might have a story that has all of these characters and every single one plays a tiny little piece into it. Or you might just have one other character who serves as like an antagonist. And the whole time our main character is going through their hardship or their trial, there's this one person in the back that's constantly like always there reminding them how much of a failure they are. Or maybe there's the other character side where they have a companion who is like, hey, I know this is hard, but I'm here for you. Like, we're going to get through this. And so those are the three pieces that I really like to start with when it comes to writing a plot. Is it a direct versus indirect threat? Are they being forced into it, or do they have the option and they're not being forced? And then what are the other characters doing at the same time? So, keeping all of these things in mind, let's go to our reference today and let's peel this back a little bit and see how these layers all fit together. So let's take the example of civilization changing in this. So in Red Dead Redemption 2, again, you have these outlaws who are rough and tough and they're robbing and stealing. And their lifestyle, all of a sudden, with the changes in technology, it's becoming harder to do that. So this we could really consider an indirect or even a direct a little bit. So maybe the indirect is technology is getting harder. So the direct threat is he has no money, he can't eat. So the threat that's happening to him is his stomach is empty and he has no strength to do his job. And it's because of the way technology has changed. So then we're getting into forced versus non forced. Arthur being a part of a gang, he has a leader that he has to serve to. And this leader of his is very, very aggressive and very dishonest with how he does things. And because he wants to be loyal to his gang, he runs into many situations where sometimes he has to do something because the gang is doing it. He's forced into it. He really doesn't have a choice because he wants to remain loyal. And so now you're getting these interactions between him and his leader of, hey, like, are you going to be loyal to this? Like, we've been in this forever. We've been in this for years. Like, I get it. It's getting hard, but we need to stick together if we're going to see this thing through. And so now it's creating this conversation in Arthur's head saying, okay, where do I draw the line? I'm trying to get out of this lifestyle and he's still trying to stay in this lifestyle. And it's just one thing after another. And so, right at that point, that's a key moment where you can drop in a character and say, okay, so Arthur feels one way. He wants to be loyal to his gang, but he notices his leader is starting to get torn. So now let's introduce John. John is now a character in this as well, who kind of is a little prideful in what he does. He always is in the encouraging one of like, yeah, like we're going to do this. Like we're never going to change. This is how we've always done life. And maybe he has the choice to look between Arthur or Arthur's leader and say, okay, well, Arthur is starting to question the motives of everything we're doing. I've got a wife and a kid, so maybe I should go more his route. Or do we want to go the route of their leader and say, no, like we're going to keep doing this. Like this is going to be fine. We're going to find a way to make this work. We'll do a couple more heists and then we'll start changing things. But every time a new heist happens, it gets worse and worse and more dangerous. And so then you introduce maybe a fourth character who is siding with the leader. So right then and there, you have four characters all looking at the same problem in four different perspectives. And I don't like to encourage drama, but drama makes a story good from time to time. It's what are these characters going to do when the next thing happens and it's a big loss? Maybe they lose a gang member, or maybe, their camp gets burned down. And so now you have these thoughts and these emotions that are bubbling up inside each person, and they're each going to interact a different way. Specifically, looking at the Maze Runner movies, that's the one reason I love this movie, or at least the movie series, is everyone has a different opinion on what to do. And you've got your main character who just comes in and it's like, nope, we need to change because what we've done in the past is not helping anything. But then you do have those stubborn characters as well who are like, no, this is how we've lived. This is how we've made it this far. So then the battle becomes, is this a battle for longevity or is this a battle for change? So my hope is taking a look at all this, it's looking to be not as hard as you thought it was to make a plot for a story that really just draws everything together. I could honestly sit and talk about this for hours. I'm literally getting worked up and sweating because of how excited I am about storytelling. Either that's awesome or I'm really out of shape. But it is also hot in here. It's probably 90 in this little recording closet. Anyway, putting all that aside, that's the beginning stage for plot writing. You could even take these plot elements and maybe all of them exist in someone's head. Maybe it's not directly impacting them in the physical, but maybe everything we've talked about, maybe it's a constant mental battle. And so you're tying in physical battles, mental battles, so many people with different decisions. And this is where your storytelling can just go so many different ways. And it just becomes so much fun to sit and be like, all right, what's the plot twist? Like, what's going to be the big thing? And one thing I forgot to mention in the original three items with direct versus indirect, forced versus non-forced, and adding in other characters is throw in a change, throw in a twist or a climax that's going to totally throw people for a loop, because that is always awesome. Like I love when people do that. Some of my favorite stories, it's you kind of see this momentum and it's building and building and building, and at some point there has to be this kind of pressure release of everything that's happening. And so that could be like we talked about a second ago, maybe it's a character who's really really important is now gone, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, like what's going to happen after this?" And then you start having all these different things and people change and they become, instead of more in the center, maybe they swing really hard one direction for one opinion or really hard for the other for a different opinion. So throwing in a curveball is another one of those things you can do to just elevate your storytelling when it comes to writing really good plot for your characters to fit into. So, one kind of fun thing when I was planning for this episode, talking about plot and characters, I was actually taken back to my eighth grade English class when we talked about writing a story where you have, your intros, you've got your rising actions, your climax and your falling action, and your conclusion. So, honestly, when it comes to story writing, there are so many things you can do. And so I'll leave with this is with everything we've talked about with writing plots specifically, mix it around. Ask a friend, if you're in the middle of writing a story or an idea for a movie, bring it in front of other people because sometimes you need different perspectives. Some of the best stories that I've ever read or written, they were collaboration projects. It was bringing in one person to just say like, "Hey, you're good at this. Like, what are your thoughts?" Or, "Hey, you're really good at writing this style. What sort of things would you put in here for this character's current conflict they're dealing with?" So when it comes to this is where you can start kind of making a pulse line for it. Is this going to start off slow or is this going to jump right in with action? Like you're in a war, like, oh man, like there was no break time at all. And so you can use these layers. And honestly, when you start from one place and then kind of slowly build up, you can start to feel the tension of the characters. Another thing, one of the best references I've ever seen as far as a rising action was reading Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. Watching him write the tension of the characters when there's a velociraptor walking around in a kitchen, that just sucked me in. And that was only like maybe like 10 pages of this book that I read out of this, multi-hundred page book. But man, the way he scaled up the conflict in it was just beautifully done. He started off with, "Hey, we need to be careful because there are dinosaurs," into, "Oh, there's a dinosaur right here," into, "Okay, this thing is now chasing me. This is very bad." But you can see how, whether it's, Red Dead Redemption 2 and Arthur, having it start off kind of easygoing with, they have some money, they're kind of figuring things out, to a rising action being, "Hey, we're really low on money. We don't have food," to this big climax where it's like, "Hey, we don't have food and one of our people just died. Like we need to make some changes." So you can just see there's like these kind of waves of emotion and storytelling and tension you can weave into everything, and really just take your readers on a ride with your story. And the beautiful thing about this is it's not just tied to stories. You can use this in songs, you can use this in recipes, you can use this in your podcast. Really, anything that you can use to communicate to a person, you can take some of these elements we've covered in our workshop so far and just trickle them in there. If it's songwriting, it's where does our character start? What lyrics are going to signify that? So I'm honestly like storytelling is my favorite topic because it can be used in so many different avenues. It's not just books and movies and media like we think of it. There are just so many different ways you can take these elements, even if it comes to character creation, and putting them in everything. So the options are honestly, they're limitless. But man, we have covered a ton in this workshop. So I hope you guys have really enjoyed everything that we've talked about. In episode one, it was powerful characters. Episode two, it was injecting them into settings where they can express themselves. And now we're wrapping up here with conflict and plot and kind of tying these pieces together. So, first, I just want to say thank you guys so much for being a part of this workshop. It has been such an honor to have the listeners I've had. A lot of you guys have submitted incredible feedback for this podcast, and I'm really just excited for what's going to happen. So, the question you're probably asking, what's next? So, the next episode of Storytellers, we're going to put all this together. I'm still tossing around a few ideas of what I'm going to do, but I think I have some things that you guys are really going to enjoy. After that, I'm excited to say I've had a couple people reach out and message me saying that they want to be on the podcast. So you're probably very shortly here in the next couple weeks going to be hearing from another storyteller. And that is something that, was one of the big intentions of creating this channel and this podcast is I want to empower storytellers. I'll have my own feedback that I'm going to give. I'll have my own storytelling experience I'm going to share with you guys, just like we did in this workshop. But I'm so excited to have people who are interested in being a part of this. So again, thank you guys so much for listening. I had a blast doing this. Thank you for being such loyal listeners. I wish I could do something membership wise for you, but all I can say is please subscribe to me. But man, thank you guys so much. And I'm excited for the next episode. So until then, take care, enjoy your storytelling, and we will talk again soon. Thanks again for listening to the Storytellers podcast. If you'd like more information on upcoming episodes or other things that I'm working on, feel free to follow me over at Instagram at the handle I am P. Lewis. Have a great day.